Computers are used for everything in the social media world. Here is your introduction to computers. There are 6 components. I'm going to tell you what they are and what they do so that next time you're yelling at your computer for it being slow, you'll know exactly what's causing it. So we're going to start with the Central Processing Unit, or the CPU. This is the component that actually does the calculations that allows your computer to operate. A CPU has cores, which are individual computers in the whole Central Processing Unit that makes the calculations. In a CPU, you typically will have several cores, not just 1 or 2. Typically, they start at about 4 and go all the way up to 24. And cores can be divided in half, again, virtually, into what are called threads. So you can have, in each thread is one process, basically. Now, an application can take multiple threads, but having more threads and more cores typically means that your computer, your CPU, is going to be able to run better and faster and handle more operations at the same time. So next, this is probably the thing that you've heard about the absolute most, and this is random access memory, or RAM. RAM is like short-term memory for your CPU. When your computer is running processes from multiple different applications, or even just one, your application is sending data to the CPU, and it has to get stored by the CPU into the RAM so that when it's ready for all of that data, it can then access it as it needs it. RAM is also typically why your computer is running slow, is because your computer is running so many things at once that your CPU simply can't store all of that information. Your RAM gets full and it starts to slow everything down. We interact with our computers visually, but there has to be something that can take the ones and zeros, the calculations, and turn them into actual graphics. This is where your GPU comes in. There are 2 types I'm going to talk about. The first one is a dedicated, and the second one is an internal. So let's start with internal. An internal graphics card is a graphics card that typically comes on your motherboard, and it uses the CPU's power as well as your RAM to convert the ones and zeros into graphics. So it's feeding off the same power that your entire computer is running off of. And typically, if you're running a game, let's say, if you're running a really hardcore game, it won't even be able to keep up and you're just going to lag all the time. But if you have a dedicated GPU, it has its own CPU and its own RAM that it can change into your graphics. So basically, it's a smaller computer inside of your computer that allows this one function to happen so that it's not becoming a drain on the rest of the computer and the operations that it's trying to do. So let's move on to storage. Storage is what you might refer to as your hard drive. We don't really use hard drives as much anymore. There are 2 different types. You have HDD, hard drive disk, which uses a spinning magnet to store information, which is your hard drive, and an SSD, which is solid state drive. An SSD stores information digitally instead of on a magnet, and because of that, it becomes so much faster when you're trying to access data, including when you're starting up your computer, it's trying to pull up your OS, your operating system. It will pull up so much faster and be ready to use ridiculously faster. Your motherboard is probably the simplest thing on this list. Your motherboard is literally just a printed circuit board that has connections for each of these different components so that they can connect into it, receive power potentially, as well as communicate with each other. Then we have a power supply, which is exactly what it sounds like. Your power supply is a big brick that goes into your casing, because this is only in desktop towers. Laptops don't need them because they have batteries. And what they have is it has a connection from the brick to your wall outlet, and it has a bunch of other connections on the other side of it in the tower that connects to the devices that need more power than just simply the motherboard can give to it. So I realize this has been a lot of information, and I hope at the very least that you understand what's making your computer slow next time. I'll see you guys later.